My subject is Dysfunction of India's Parliament, and it equally applies to the state legislatures. Now, the word dysfunction really means that Parliament is not functioning the way it ought to be, the way it should. It means that. How do we judge that? We judge that in two ways in this talk. One, the productivity of Parliament. Parliament is meant for legislating, and therefore I would have to give you some figures illustrating that very little time is spent on legislating the primary work of Parliament, and a lot of time is wasted on walkouts or noise or things like that. That is one. And the second thing is the tenor of the discussions, the lack of respect for each other. That is the quality of the debates. That's what I'm talking about. First, the quantity, how much productivity. Two, the quality. The quality depends on the tenor. The quality depends on the respect for each other. The quality depends on the points you make. That's what it is all about. So both these things are my criteria. Now, before I come to that, I would have to say that Parliament has to be judged according to a very, very important template. And that is that the template may be high, but it is part of our constitutional history, and we cannot ignore it. The Constitutional Assembly debates in 1946 and thereabouts set a template for respectful deliberation. They were, in a manner of speaking, the first Parliament, because the Constituent Assembly in the mornings was a deliberative assembly, just like any other, and in the afternoons they were drafting the Constitution. It doubled as a Constituent Assembly. It was a very important assembly. They met for 165 days in 11 sessions, 101 days of intensive clause by clause discussion and debate. A staggering 36 lakh words were spoken, reflecting depth and gravitas. 60 days were set apart for fundamental rights. The Constituent Assembly, which, as I said earlier, was really a parliament, the first parliament of sorts, a legislative assembly. It handled 2,473 amendments, which mirror the rigorous scrutiny of all the provisions in the Constitution. And there you have the result. The longest written constitution in all democratic constitutions. That is the template. That is the template in terms of numbers. But the tenor of the discussions, that is also an important template. Respectful of each other's opinions. Sobriety and restraint in the manner in which they spoke. Those were the templates. I would particularly want to highlight, well, there were great people there, really giants. I would like to highlight not one of those huge personalities of brilliance and erudition. I've spoken about constitution making earlier in one of my videos. But I want to speak about Jayapal Singh Munda, who on December 19, 1946, and I quote from him, he offered his perspectives. You cannot teach democracy to tribal people. You have to learn democratic ways from them. They are the most democratic people on earth. Here we are all on trial. I find no tribal woman member. I must draw attention of this House to the life of 25 million tribals. So this is the kind of tenor of the discussions. Always with humility, always with restraint, always wanting to persuade the other, always having the touchstone of reasonable presentation. And from there, what a mighty fall. The productivity of the 1950s was generally somewhat all right, really, nothing to complain about. Days of intensive discussion happened in drafting and legislating important matters like the Hindu code bills, land reform bills. All these were discussed over days. And the gravity of those subjects were reflected in the gravitas of those who spoke, including such great people like Govind Vallabh Pant. And now we have, of course, there's been a progressive decline in productivity. I spoke about the 1950s. And there has been a decline even from 16th Lok Sabha to the 18th Lok Sabha, which was an absolute low in productivity. A mighty fall from all those times earlier. The PRS Legislative Research, which does very good work on parliamentary functioning, highlighted the extremely low productivity of the monsoon session, the 2025 monsoon session. That's the latest figures that we have, the parliament, the monsoon session of the Lok Sabha. The Lok Sabha functioned for only 29% of the scheduled time, 29%, and the Rajya Sabha for 34% of the scheduled time. Allotted private members' time went unused. There was a disproportionate use of time in discussing Operation Sindoor, 19 hours in the Lok Sabha and 16 hours in the Rajya Sabha, almost half of the functioning time and 1/3 of the functioning time of the Rajya Sabha. Operation Sindoor was a limited military operation that lasted about 4 days or so. By its very nature, there was nothing that we could discuss for this amount of time. And remember, these parliamentary operations cost money, 2.5 lakhs per minute. 2.5 lakhs per minute. Therefore, when we have 3 days of interruption, and there were many, what it costs is something like 23 crores of rupees. That is money. There is an economic cost to all this. There is an opportunity cost to all this. There is money needed for health. There is money needed for children's health. The stunting, education. You can think of many others where this money could have been used. So you see that all this has got a tremendous cost, opportunity cost you might call it. In the monsoon session, very few bills were referred to committees. Now that has become almost a norm now. More than half of the bills were passed in a hurry, some only in a few minutes. How can you pass a bill in a few minutes? A bill is there because that is the democratic process of lawmaking. And if you do not spend time and effort on this, you are weakening an important pillar, an important organ of government. You know, the three organs of government, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, are one pillar. You are weakening a pillar by this kind of rushing through. Start questions were all, most of them were not replied orally. That is the meaning of the start questions in the list. They were converted into unstart questions, which means that the minister need not get up and reply. It is there, printed as an answer. The same thing holds good for other instruments of accountability of the executive to the legislature. The question hour has all but faded away. The call attention motions, where the government's attention is drawn to various important issues, that too has gone by the wayside. So this is the statistics. But worse than that is the tenor, the manner of discussion. If you look at the template of the Constituent Assembly debates, we might say, oh, what a fall was there, my countrymen. And this is, you have name calling. Each side considers the other as enemies. Obstructionist tactics have been almost weaponized. Both sides shout at each other. There is supreme contempt of one side for the other. Everything that is spoken, including the body language, is one of extreme antagonism. This was not what the constitution makers intended. They were adopting the Westminster model of government, which is the British model, because we were under British rule, and the 1935 Act was the basis of the constitution making. Government of India Act 1935. Now, the Westminster type of government is founded on accountability of the executive to the legislature. Here we have practically done away with this concept, because this accountability of the executive to the legislature is a matter of executive understanding of Parliament's rule. It is not a matter of arithmetic that you have all the majority there with you, because this is how the party system works. You have a lot of majority, and that's how you form the government from the legislature. But the fact is that this is not just a numbers. This is the voice of people, and therefore a democratic ethic, a democratic culture of listening to them. I remember as a young boy how respectful Jawaharlal Nehru, the Prime Minister, was to the leader of the opposition, A.K. Gopalan. And now the number of legislators who were with the A.K. Gopalan were just a few. But A.K. Gopalan's speeches were listened to with respect by the Prime Minister, because it is not the numbers. It is that he was putting across a view from his experience. That is what the Westminster type of government is. Well, we'll have to put this historically. How did all this come to pass? How was this fall, this great mighty fall? Well, from the time of Indira Gandhi's frontal attack on the Constitution and the emergency, the spirit of the Constitution, that of listening to the other side, was lost. Perhaps for a long time. And there was the beginning of another process by which the chief executive, the Prime Minister and the Chief Ministers had a lot of authority with them and powers with them. The Hindu, in a recent article, 26th August, pointed out that the concentration of powers in the chief executive, the Prime Minister or the Chief Ministers, is linked to the dysfunction of Parliament, the central Parliament and the legislatures. There might be something in that, because the Westminster model, which we chose deliberately, is something like this. The Prime Minister is primus inter pares, first among equals, not an overbearing figure, whether it is the Prime Minister or the Chief Minister. The concentration of authority and powers was not envisaged in the Westminster model. But after Indira Gandhi and the terrible emergency, we have been having a slow slide into this kind of phenomena, with the result that the chief executive has got a lot of powers, and there is a corresponding diminution in the authority of the legislatures. The figures speak for themselves. The Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha have been practically sidelined. They stand as relics, some kind of outer layer of things. Otherwise, things are done. So this ignoring of the legislature is very much there, already there. These are not good signs, because I'm not saying that anything is going to happen immediately. I'm not a prophet, least of all a prophet of doom, because I am an optimist of India's future, our country's future. But the historical connections are there. Whether it is Hitler, 1933, after the Reichstag fire and his enabling act, and the weakening of their parliament, of Germany's parliament, whether it is Italy under Mussolini, or if you take the modern times, whether it is Venezuela under Chavez and Maduro, or Turkey, or anywhere else, the weakening of parliament is a precursor to a slow slide to authoritarian ways. This is something there as plain as anything for all to see. And it is with some disquiet that I want to express this connection that exists in history. God forbid that things would reach such a pass. As I said, although there is disquiet, we all have to be optimistic of our democratic future, because the ideals of those great men who drafted the Constitution and those debates, those words of theirs and their spirit cannot go in vain.